What if I told you that emotional intelligence isn't just a social skill, but a deep psychological mastery, rooted in the very structure of your unconscious mind? Emotionally intelligent people don't just react, they reflect. They don't just respond, they understand. And they do this not because they were born wiser, but because they dared to look within again and again. They have walked through their inner chaos, made peace with their wounds, and emerged with clarity. They understand what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So if you've ever wondered what makes someone emotionally powerful, if you've ever felt the pull to evolve beyond emotional survival and into emotional depth, then this message is for you. Let's explore the 12 deep transformative traits emotionally intelligent people share, discover how to embody them yourself. They do not abandon themselves in the storm. That is where we begin. Or what is emotional intelligence, if not the soul's capacity to remain with itself when the winds rise and the sky darkens? It is not brilliance of the mind, nor the cleverness of words, but rather the quiet inner knowing that says, "I will not leave myself here, not again." There is a silence within the emotionally intelligent person that cannot be shaken, not because they do not feel the chaos, but because they have befriended it. They no longer run from the inner weather, they let it come, and they let it go. The emotionally intelligent do not treat pain as an intruder. They do not treat sadness as something shameful. They do not view anger as a betrayal of their spirit. They allow these visitors to enter, to sit, to speak. They understand that the soul is not healed by suppression, but by presence. And when the storm comes, they do not scream for escape. They close their eyes and listen for what it is here to teach. The immature part of us, the frightened self, wants the pain to stop. It wants resolution now. But the wise self, the one that has walked through fire and still stands, knows that pain is a passage, not a punishment. You see, emotional intelligence is not found in how well someone avoids suffering, and is revealed in how fully they accompany themselves through it. When relationships crumble, they don't rush to fill the space. When love fades or betrayal strikes, they do not abandon the heart just to feel whole again. No, they sit beside the ache. They learn how to hold the wound without needing to fix it immediately, because they understand that every emotion is an invitation, an initiation into deeper self-awareness. They are no longer terrified of their own emotional intensity. They do not shrink when anxiety rises. They don't numb themselves with distraction. They breathe through it. They speak gently to the fear. They learn how to stay when everything inside them says run. This is what the world often mistakes for strength. But it is not the strength of walls. It is the strength of openness. To remain open in the face of pain is the greatest act of bravery a soul can offer itself. The emotionally intelligent do not betray themselves just to maintain the illusion of peace. They do not smile to please when their heart is screaming to be heard. They do not stay silent in rooms where their truth is not welcome. They choose self-respect over temporary belonging. And when they feel the urge to abandon themselves by pretending, by pleasing, by staying too long where they are not honored, they pause, they breathe, they return. Returning to oneself is not an act you perform once. It is a sacred rhythm.
Over and over again.
They come home to their heart, not because it is comfortable, but because it is true, because they know that no external validation can fill the void that is left when we disconnect from our own soul. They have learned the cost of self-abandonment, and they are no longer willing to pay it. And so when the storm arrives, they do not dissolve, they do not flee, they become a still point within the chaos, not unaffected, but anchored. Their presence becomes a lighthouse, not just for others, but for themselves, a place of return, a reminder that I am allowed to feel, and I do not have to lose myself to feel it. They no longer confuse emotional independence with isolation. They understand that to hold themselves is not to reject others, but to honor their own energy first. They are not afraid to lean on others, but they never collapse into them. They do not seek rescue, they seek resonance. And when it is not available, they do not beg. They turn inward, they listen, they remember who they are. They have trained themselves to stay in the room of their own discomfort, to sit in the fire of their own feelings, without needing to extinguish it prematurely, because they trust the wisdom of the burn. They trust that the wound is not evidence of failure, but of awakening. And even when it hurts, they choose to remain. They read between what is said and what is felt. You may think understanding someone is about listening to the words that come out of their mouth, but words are often a disguise. They are dressed, polished, and rehearsed. Emotionally intelligent people do not stop at what is spoken. They listen to what trembles underneath. They have learned to sense the weight in someone's silence, the ache behind their smile, the fear in their deflection. They know that the heart often speaks in riddles, and the soul rarely uses language at all. They feel energy. They observe shifts. They notice what others miss. There is something sacred about this kind of perception. It is not learned in books. It is learned through pain, through being misunderstood, through being dismissed so many times that you began to recognize the patterns in others. Those who have suffered emotionally do not just become more wounded, they often become more attuned, more perceptive, more present, because they've had to sit in the spaces no one else could sit with them in, and now they recognize when someone else is hiding in those same shadows. And they do not weaponize this insight. They do not use what they sense to manipulate or control. Instead, they create a space so safe, so calm, that the other person begins to soften. They begin to trust, not because they were forced to, but because someone finally saw them clearly and did not run. This is the miracle of being understood, not just heard, but felt. Most people only listen so they can respond. The emotionally intelligent listen to understand. They are not waiting for their turn to speak. They are not trying to win. They are trying to connect. This is why their presence feels healing. Even in silence, you feel more seen. You will often find these people drawn to those who are guarded, misunderstood, or emotionally distant, not because they are trying to save them, but because they recognize something familiar. They know the language of emotional exile. They have lived through it, and so they do not judge those who struggle to express themselves. They listen for what is trapped in the body, for what the nervous system is too afraid to release. They notice the micro-expressions, the quick glance away, the shift in tone, the words that catch in the throat. To others, it's nothing. To them, it's everything. This level of awareness is not about mind reading. It's about being deeply present. When you are present, the subtle becomes obvious. You begin to notice how someone lights up when they speak of something they love, and how quickly they dim when they feel dismissed. You begin to feel the residue of trauma in someone's need to control a conversation, or the abandoned child in someone's inability to sit in silence. It's not always about analysis. Sometimes it's simply about being with the truth as it arises, without trying to change it. And so the emotionally intelligent person does not seek perfect words or flawless expression. They seek emotional truth. They would rather hear a shaky, honest sentence than a polished lie. They would rather sit in a vulnerable silence than drown in empty chatter, because they know that true connection lives in what is felt, not in what is performed. They do not chase people to open up. They do not beg for depth. They simply remain grounded in their own presence. And those who are ready, those who are tired of pretending, begin to show themselves. This is how transformation happens, not through force, but through the gentle invitation to be real. And perhaps the greatest gift of emotionally intelligent people is this: they do not fear your darkness. They will not flinch when you reveal the parts of you that feel too broken, too wild, too much. They will not look away when your voice shakes or your truth is messy. They will stay. They will witness, and they will understand, even when you don't have the words. They make space for every emotion without judgment. This is not something learned through theory. It is born through experience, through years of resisting emotions, until they broke through like floods, through collapsing under the weight of feelings they were taught to fear, until one day they realized something quietly revolutionary: that no emotion, however dark or uncomfortable, was ever the enemy, that every feeling held a message, and that presence, not resistance, was the path to peace. Emotionally intelligent person no longer fears their own emotional landscape. They do not categorize parts of their inner world as good or bad. Joy is not more holy than sorrow. Anger is not less sacred than love. Instead, they allow it all to rise and pass. They witness every emotion with the same compassion they would offer a dear friend. When grief comes, they do not push it down or dress it in false positivity. They make tea for it. They open the door and say, "Sit, tell me what I haven't been listening to." This openness does not come from weakness. It is the essence of strength, because it takes far more courage to feel deeply than to numb. It takes bravery to let sadness speak, to let shame rise up without turning away. Those who lack emotional intelligence will often try to erase discomfort the moment it appears. They distract, they dismiss, they joke, but the emotionally intelligent person recognizes that running from a feeling only makes it louder. Only by turning toward it do we begin to soften its grip. They do not shame themselves for feeling too much, and they do not celebrate themselves for feeling less. They have left the old paradigm of emotional control. Now they seek emotional congruence, where what they feel and what they express are in harmony, even if it's messy, even if it doesn't look perfect, because authenticity matters more than appearance, because peace is not found in pretending to be okay, it's found in honoring where you are. And this acceptance extends to others. They do not ask others to suppress their feelings just to keep the peace. They do not flinch when someone cries, or withdraw when someone is angry, because they are not afraid of emotional truth. They know how to hold space for others, because they've learned to hold space for themselves. They don't rush to rescue you from your sadness with solutions. They sit with you in it, because they understand the soul does not always need answers. It needs presence. Many people are afraid of emotions because they were never shown how to sit with them. Perhaps they were taught that crying was weakness, or that anger must be suppressed, or that vulnerability is dangerous. But the emotionally intelligent person has unlearned those lies. They've realized that feeling deeply is not a liability, it's a gift. It brings clarity. It brings connection. It brings healing. And yes, sometimes those emotions are overwhelming. Sometimes they come all at once. But emotional intelligence does not mean you never fall apart. It means you no longer shame yourself when you do. It means you hold yourself with gentleness in the middle of the breakdown. You don't abandon your heart just because it's hurting. You don't exile your inner child just because they're crying again. You stay, you breathe, you listen. This is how healing happens. Not through perfection, but through presence. Not through silencing the pain, but through hearing what it needs. Emotional intelligence is the art of returning to yourself again and again, no matter what is moving through you. And in that return, you begin to realize you are not the storm, you are the sky it moves through. You are not the emotion, you are the space that holds it. And so they allow it all. The light and the dark, the joy and the sorrow, the confidence and the doubt. They do not need to feel only the beautiful to know they are worthy, because they have seen that even their pain, when honored, becomes a pathway to deeper truth. They respond. They do not react. This is the difference between one who has met their inner world and one who is still ruled by it. Emotional intelligence is not the absence of feeling, nor is it emotional detachment. It is presence. It is the sacred pause between the trigger and the action, between the discomfort and the decision. It is the breath that interrupts the cycle of unconscious repetition and says, "Wait, I want to choose differently this time." There is a quiet kind of power in this, not the kind that dominates or controls, but the kind that transforms. Emotionally intelligent people have learned that every reaction holds within it a deeper origin. No one is ever just angry. No one is ever just cold. These are surface waves, but underneath, there's often fear, there's hurt, there's a story that hasn't been healed. And so, rather than explode or retreat when confronted, they pause. They ask themselves, what is this really about? Is it them, or is it something I haven't yet met in myself? They no longer give their power away to the moment. They no longer hand over their peace to every passing emotion or provocation. They've seen what happens when they do, and they've paid the price. The words said in heat that couldn't be unsaid. The emotional spirals that came from trying to control what they didn't yet understand. And slowly over time, they learned it's not always about getting the last word. It's about keeping your center. This does not mean they suppress. This does not mean they avoid. It means they slow down. It means they listen inward before speaking outward. They know that just because an emotion is loud doesn't mean it's right. Just because a thought is urgent doesn't mean it's true. Emotional intelligence gives them the ability to be with intensity without becoming it. They can sit with discomfort and still make conscious choices. They can be triggered and still remain kind. They can feel the fire without setting everything around them ablaze. And that is not easy. It requires incredible self-awareness. It requires knowing your patterns, especially the ones that were born from childhood, the ones that still whisper old fears into present moments. Emotionally intelligent people don't just ask what they feel, they ask why. They investigate, not to judge, but to understand. They don't shame themselves for the instinct to lash out. They recognize it. They soothe it. They say to the wound within them, "I see you, but I will not let you speak for me today." There is a discipline here, but it is not rigid. It is not harsh. It is loving. It is the kind of discipline that holds a child, not scolds them. When their anger rises, they do not shut it down. They breathe into it. They explore it. They ask what it is protecting, because they've learned that underneath every reaction is a part of themselves that once didn't feel safe. And now, instead of abandoning that part or allowing it to take over, they tend to it. This is not avoidance. This is integration. They have become skilled at responding from the whole self, not just the wound. And when they speak, there's weight to their words, not because they are forceful, but because they are clear. They don't speak from urgency.
No.
They speak from understanding. They don't speak to win. They speak to connect. Even in conflict, their aim is not destruction. It is clarity. It is truth. It is a deeper peace, not a shallow victory. And when they do react, because yes, sometimes they still do, they take responsibility. They do not deflect, deny, or blame. They pause. They reflect. They apologize without losing themselves. Because emotional intelligence is not perfection. It is repair. It is being able to say, that wasn't my best moment, but I see it now, and I choose differently going forward. This way of being changes everything. It softens relationships. It brings safety into communication. It teaches others, not through preaching, but through presence. When someone sees that you can stay grounded in a storm, it invites them to do the same. When you choose not to react, but to respond, it sends a message. I am not here to fight you. I am here to understand what is happening inside of me and to honor what is real between us. They take nothing personally because they've come to understand that most people are projecting. The words people say, the tones they use, the way they withdraw, dismiss, attack, or ignore. It rarely has anything to do with you. And yet, before emotional maturity has taken root, it's easy to believe otherwise. It's easy to carry the weight of others' pain as if it's yours, to internalize their silence as rejection, to interpret their coldness as evidence of your unworthiness. But the emotionally intelligent person has walked that path long enough to know where it leads. They've followed the thread of other people's behavior back to its source and discovered that the origin is almost always internal, almost always rooted in the other's fears, wounds, and unmet needs. When someone lashes out, they no longer ask, "What did I do wrong?" They ask, "What might they be carrying that has nothing to do with me?" This shift is not about spiritual bypassing or dismissing responsibility. It's about discernment. It's about knowing what belongs to you and what does not. It's about having boundaries, not just in action, but in perception. Because not every opinion is truth. Not every accusation is insight. Not every mood someone brings into a room is your burden to absorb. This detachment does not mean indifference. In fact, it allows for deeper compassion. When you are no longer defensive, you can listen more clearly. When you are no longer internalizing everything, you can witness the pain behind someone's reaction without getting caught in it. Emotionally intelligent people do not deny the impact of someone's behavior, but they refuse to make it personal unless it actually is. They know that much of what we receive from others is filtered through layers of their history, abandonment, shame, grief, disappointment. And they've done enough of their own shadow work to recognize those patterns when they see them reflected in others. This clarity gives rise to a rare kind of freedom, a freedom from the exhausting habit of self-blame, a freedom from constantly rewriting your worth based on how others treat you, a freedom from needing to control how you are perceived. And still, they remain deeply empathetic. They understand that everyone is doing the best they can from the level of awareness they are currently at. This doesn't mean they excuse harm, but they understand its origin. This is what makes their presence feel both firm and gentle, because they can hold you accountable while also understanding why you acted the way you did. They can say, "This behavior is not acceptable," and still say it with kindness, because they're not trying to punish, they're trying to relate honestly. They've lived through the ache of misunderstanding and the sting of being misread. They've walked through the fire of rejection and emerged not bitter, but clear. They no longer need everyone to like them. They no longer believe that every disconnection is a reflection of their failure. Sometimes people leave because they're not ready to meet you where you are. Sometimes people project because they're at war with themselves. And sometimes silence, anger, or avoidance from others is the best they know how to do with their pain. The emotionally intelligent understand this. They've been there too. This kind of emotional strength is not coldness. It is warmth with boundaries. It is compassion without self-erasure. It is forgiveness without forgetting what you need. And when they are confronted, judged, or rejected, they return to themselves first, not to the opinions of others. They breathe, they feel, they listen inward, because they know that when you no longer take things personally, you no longer give your power away. And from this place, they can love more freely, because they are not afraid of being misunderstood. They are not walking on eggshells, trying to manage others' emotions. They have nothing to prove, nothing to hide, nothing to beg for. They know how to hold space for others without losing themselves. It is one of the most profound abilities a person can develop. this gentle art of being with someone in their emotional truth, without absorbing their chaos or dissolving into their pain. Most people, when confronted with another's grief, anger, confusion, or fear, either try to fix it or flee from it. They become uncomfortable, not because the emotion is dangerous, but because it awakens something unhealed within them. But the emotionally intelligent have spent time with their own pain. They've sat in the fire of their own sorrow. They've made peace with not knowing, not being able to fix, not being able to save. And so, they no longer panic in the face of someone else's emotional intensity. They stay. To hold space is not to offer solutions. It is not to judge, interrupt, diagnose, or manage. It is to be present, to be still, to be a mirror without distortion, reflecting back the person's humanity, without adding your own noise. It requires deep stillness inside, a steadiness that isn't easily thrown off balance by someone else's storm. The emotionally intelligent person has cultivated that steadiness, not by pretending to be strong, but by being willing to feel everything. And because they have learned to stay with their own truth, they can now stay with yours, even when it's messy, even when it's raw. They don't need to rescue you from your pain, because they understand that pain is not the enemy. They know that healing comes not from being saved, but from being seen. And they can offer that seeing without judgment, without fear. They can hold your sadness in silence, without rushing it toward light. They can sit with your anger, without defending themselves. They can listen to your shame, without trying to change the subject. They are not afraid of your shadow, because they are not afraid of their own. And still, they don't lose themselves in the process. They don't dissolve their own boundaries just to support someone else. They've learned the delicate balance between empathy and self-abandonment. They understand that compassion must include themselves too. And so, they don't take responsibility for emotions that aren't theirs. They don't carry pain that was never meant to be theirs to hold. They stay rooted in their own energy, even as they extend warmth and presence to another. This wisdom did not come easily. It was forged through years of overgiving, of confusing empathy with martyrdom, of staying too long, of forgetting themselves while trying to heal others. But with time, they learned that love without boundaries is not love, it's sacrifice. They learned that you can be a sanctuary for others and still protect your peace. They learned that you can open your heart without spilling it on the floor. And so now, when someone weeps, they stay. When someone confesses their shame, they do not flinch. When someone reveals their darkness, they do not turn away. But they also do not disappear into the story. They remain centered, anchored, aware of who they are, even in the presence of deep emotion, because they understand this. To truly hold space for another, you must first have space within yourself. And that space is not built in a day. It is carved slowly, with tenderness and truth. It is created every time you sit with your own heartbreak, every time you choose to breathe through your fear rather than numb it, every time you tell the truth about what hurts and let that truth transform you. They've discovered that solitude is not emptiness. It is intimacy, a kind of sacred closeness with oneself that can never be touched by external validation or the presence of others. They've made friends with their own inner voice, not just the gentle parts, but the ones that once accused, once doubted, once screamed for attention. And over time, by listening, by staying, by not abandoning themselves when discomfort rose, they softened those voices, not by silencing them forcefully, but by showing them they no longer had to scream to be heard. This is how peace is born, not from escaping your aloneness, but from embracing it fully. When you no longer need someone else to complete you, when you no longer seek a mirror to feel worthy, when your joy is not dependent on constant connection, that is when you become free, and not the kind of freedom that feels lonely, but the kind that feels full, whole, grounded, rooted in yourself in a way that no external force can shake. The emotionally intelligent have come to understand that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. They no longer confuse quiet with punishment. They no longer mistake solitude for lack. They see it instead as a homecoming, a chance to return to the parts of themselves that get diluted in noise, a sacred pause where no performance is necessary, where no mask is required, where the self can just be without expectation, without needing to impress or be understood. They've learned to enjoy their own company, not out of arrogance, but out of self-companionship, out of respect for the inner life they've cultivated, out of reverence for the beauty they can access when there is no one else there to validate it. Because when you are no longer terrified of your own thoughts, when you can sit in a room alone and not reach for your phone or the nearest distraction, that is a kind of power most people never touch, and it is not loud. It does not need to prove itself. It simply is. And in this solitude, something else emerges, the clarity, because without the noise of others' expectations, without the pressure of performance, the truth becomes louder. The heart speaks more clearly. Desires that were buried begin to surface. Patterns that were unconscious become visible. And this clarity is not always comfortable, but it is always liberating, because the emotionally intelligent person would rather sit in uncomfortable truth than float in comfortable illusion. They've also discovered that solitude heals, not in the way of isolation, not in the way of closing off the world, but in the way of resetting, rebalancing, returning to what's real. In solitude, they've grieved losses that were never fully felt. They've processed conversations that left invisible bruises. They've reparented the younger versions of themselves who still wait to be chosen. And they've done this not by escaping, but by choosing to stay with what most people run from, to stay with the ache, to stay with the stillness, to stay long enough for it to become sacred. There is a kind of radiance that arises from people who have made peace with being alone. You can feel it when they walk into a room, not because they demand attention, but because they don't need it. There is no hunger in their energy, no desperation, no invisible pull, asking to be filled. They are already full, and so when they do connect with others, it is not from lack, it is from overflow, not because they need you, but because they see you. And that kind of connection is rare, because it is rooted in wholeness, not in longing. They've stopped fearing the quiet because they've found wisdom there. They've stopped fearing the space between relationships because they now use that space to grow. They no longer rush to fill the void because they've learned that what looks like a void is often just a doorway to deeper self-awareness. And they've walked through that doorway again and again until what once felt like isolation now feels like sanctuary. And it is from that sanctuary that they love, from that stillness that they create, from that aloneness that they draw strength, not the brittle strength that comes from walls, but the tender strength that comes from deep self-connection. They are not afraid of being misunderstood, not afraid of being left, not afraid of being unseen, because they have already seen themselves. And when you have seen yourself fully, when you have stayed with your heart through its worst storms, when you have met your loneliness and turned it into a friend, there is nothing left to fear. And so they walk through the world whole. And because they do, they invite others to become whole too.